Hey there, so today's video is going to be a little more low-key than the more recent ones. This one's more for fun. I'm going to be talking about 10 cards that I think we should play more. This is not so much an underrated cards list, although there is a little bit of overlap there, but more cards that I think we haven't found the right home for them yet, or maybe lists are so tight, especially in more established archetypes, that we're not really experimenting much with these cards in those lists. And I think they're all powerful cards that could certainly be providing some added boost to some decks or some new archetypes. Before we get going, please click that subscribe button. Helps out a ton. We're closing in on 3K. You can also check out my new Patreon. It's in the link is in the description below. All right, so let's go with number 10. And it's Dr. Evisen. So I've been kind of all over the place on this card. When it was first teased, I thought this card was incredible. Then I thought it was kind of awful. Now I'm kind of somewhere in between. But all in all, I don't see it getting played very much, and I think it's certainly good enough to get some play. There's a lot of decks and archetypes that I think could benefit from potentially including this. Some established stuff like Boba Fett could try to dig into Evisen's power, play a little more aggressive, using him, potentially using McClunky as well to kind of help mitigate his downside. Remember, the downside only really triggers if your opponent has spent resources that turn, which is really bad when you're doing things like Vigilance or Takedown on him and then resetting all the resources. But if you're able to just trade off the unit before they've spent resources, Evisen is a powerhouse because he can do some early damage, he's protected, and he can get like a trade up because of his costs. Other places to look at him, I think Cad Bane. I've been working on some Cad Bane stuff. We'll probably get a video out on him at some point in the future, but obviously this is an underworld card that triggers Cad Bane, which is incredibly powerful. Cad Bane already wants to run McClunky because it's another underworld card, so you can actually get like 4 damage McClunkies in Cad Bane. So I think Evisen is a pretty nice slide in there. You could look at Gar Saxon, where this comes in as a 4/3. That's also very powerful. Kylo Yellow, I think, might be the best home for Evisen, where you're getting a protected early drop that you can then pump with Kylo's ability. Shielded units, I'm very high on them right now. I think they're the easiest way to represent damage, especially against control decks once those control decks have stabilized. Whenever someone has to spend 2 actions to get through a shielded unit, makes life more difficult for them. They become very good top decks later in the game if you're able to drop them, because you now have a unit that's much more likely to survive into the next turn. And Evisen fits that bill. Obviously, the downside here is tremendous. You got to watch out for especially like blue villain decks, but also things like Fighters for Freedom out of Sabine, right? Like if they ambush it with Energy Conversion Lab and kill your Evisen and reset, you might lose the game on the spot. So he's not for playing all the time, and he's not for jamming willy-nilly, but I think it's a card that we need to start considering a little more in a variety of archetypes. All right, number 9, Frozen in Carbonite. This is another yellow villain card, but very different from Evisen. This is very much not an aggressive card. This is a more controlling card. I think a part of the issue with this card and why it doesn't see a lot of play is the place to look for yellow villain control is usually paired with blue. And blue plays cards like Power of the Dark Side, where this kind of bricks it, right? It's not great to combo with Power of the Dark Side. It's not the end of the world, right? Like if you play this and you draw Power of the Dark Side later, you probably resource that Power of the Dark Side, or you wait for a reset, right? Like Super Laser Blast. But I think you can also look at this card outside of blue decks. Things like green-yellow villain decks, Boba, Cad Bane can both play an ECL deck. And I think those decks need to dig in a little more into their mid-range nature and not so much their aggressive nature. And Frozen in Carbonite is a very clean answer to some very problematic cards. I think it's one of the cleanest answers we have into a Fett's Fire Spray right now, especially because things like Power of the Dark Side don't work if there's another unit in play. And then most of the other removal that hits Fett's Fire Spray would cost more than 3. And also, it's in a color that doesn't typically answer big threats, right? Like this can lock down an Avenger if needed. So I think the card itself is very powerful. I know why it doesn't see a lot of play in Boba, right? We want things getting removed in Boba because then you get to activate his ability and reset resources. But certainly if you're going to play like a control boba with blue, I think you should start looking at this card. But it can also be looked at as a sideboard card in a lot of yellow villain decks, as basically hard removal in a color that doesn't really get that. I think it's got some potential to sneak into some decks. All right, number 8, Remnant Reserves. I talk about this card actually in my underrated cards. I think there's 2 or 3 cards on this list that I did talk about in underrated. But Remnant Reserves is a 4-cost draw 3. If your deck is built to do that, right? If your deck is primarily units, I would say 35 and up. It's going to get pretty reliably into the draw 3 range. Obviously, any more than that, and it's going to be very reliable. And we're entering kind of a meta where I think attrition decks are on the rise. You've got these blue-red young Han decks, which are very grindy decks that play not only discard, but smuggle between like cards that just have smuggle and tech to give all your cards smuggle. And they're aiming to like go long and just simply grind you with card advantage. You've got Kira Green, which is another grindy deck that relies very much on the power of all the 2-for-1 cards in the deck itself, whether they are things like Barrage or Vader or Snoke or Avenger, right? Outside of that, there's going to be things opening up to target those decks, and I think one way to look at targeting them is simply play your own grindy cards. And Remnant Reserves is one of the cleanest draw engines in the game, I think. It certainly makes your opponent playing Pillage kind of funny, because if they play 4 to Pillage and you play Remnant Reserve to draw 3, you're just up a card on that turn, and that is a very good way to punish hard discard. Searching 5, it's not a ton of selection, but again, if your deck is primarily units, you should be able to find not only fodder so that you can resource, but some cards that you actually want to play. And I think this can be looked at certainly as a sideboard card. I don't think it's so much of a main deck card, but I think it could be a sideboard card for villain green decks trying to play more attrition. All right, number 7, Ruthless Raider. Set 1 card. This card, I don't see it very often right now. I think it should just be getting played more. Ruthless Raider is a very, very good card against blue removal. And that does not just mean like blue-green villain decks. I think this card is also very good into like the new Han decks that also try to leverage things like Takedown and Fell the Dragon as their removal. Ruthless Raider is just sneaky good in dodging removal. It's sneaky good in providing immediate impact. The damage adds up so much. It's very, very powerful. It can be ambushed with Energy Conversion Lab that takes out things like Fire Spray if needed. It's a good card to triple Dark Raid or sneak attack in out of the deck. It's, you know, I think at its best, it's probably against like villain control decks where not only is it kind of breaking the removal, but it just gives you reach and looping a few Ruthless Raiders, whether it's not just by like drawing them or playing things like Palp's Return or Emperor's Legion to buy them back. The damage can really, really add up. It's a very clean card to just play on 6 resources as long as you're not absolutely getting face smashed, just giving you a tiny bit of value and presenting a very safe threat. So Ruthless Raider stocks, I think, on the rise, and we should be looking at playing some more red villain decks in general and leveraging Raider in them. All right, number 6, Fenic Shand. I don't think I've ever seen this card played against me, and it's actually pretty good, right? Like, I see Han played against me, the Han unit, all the time, and we got to think, like, how much worse is Fenic Shand most of the time than Han versus when is it better? So naturally, she takes damage back when she attacks, so the only way she does the Han thing where, like, she kills something without taking damage back is if your your discard pile is filled with different costs so that she can snipe something, right? You got 4 costs, she can snipe a 4-drop and then leave behind that 4/6. It's not as big as leaving behind a 6/6, but it's quite big still. Now, where does Fenic do a better job than Han is when you want to kill things with more than 6 health, right? So she can do that with at 3 cards in the discard pile. She can now do 7. Now she'll take damage back, but if you need to kill something that has 7 health, she does that. She's Underworld. You can look at that with Cat Bane potentially, where you even get an extra ping damage before her ambush. And where I think she might truly shine is if you can construct a deck where you can get 6 different cards into your resource into your discard. I keep saying resource. Into your discard pile, because Snoke is a card, and Snoke is an absolute hammer against yellow decks right now. And Fenic Shand being able to deal 6 into a Snoke, potentially for free, right? If you have 6 costs and kill it, is huge, right? Han can't do that. He can only attack Snoke for 4. She can actually attack the Snoke for 2, and then if you have 4 cards in your discard pile, you can actually kill the Snoke and trade. But, oh, imagine how crazy it would be if you just deal 6 to that Snoke and Fenic survives. In general, I think we can look at, playing a split with Han, or maybe playing one Fenic as the 4th Han. I think the card's just pretty good, and I'm surprised that most decks are basically just playing 3 Han, 0 Fenic, and I think that might need to change. Number 5, top target. Now, this might be too late for this list. I think a lot of people are catching on, but this is a hammer against Sabine. This is one of the best sideboard cards in the game against her. I think basically any blue deck should be playing top targets in the sideboard for that matchup. It is so much heal. It is very easy to squeeze into a curve. That heal, that bounty, right, is not just for the turn. So, like, you can play it, cash in on it later. It's okay for it to sit around there. You just need to basically watch out for something like Poe coming down and ambushing and, like, destroying the upgrade. But for the most part, this squeezes in very nicely into a curve, and basically, especially when it's the 6th heal, can invalidate 2 attacks from a unit, and it can just sit there, and that unit is basically doing 0 damage to you in the meantime. I really like top target. You combine this with things like the Client and Vigilance, and you can get absolutely insane amount of heal that is really hard for these Sabine decks to claw out of. Top target should be kind of everywhere right now. I kind of just put 3 in every sideboard whenever I make a blue deck at this point. And I recommend you trying that too. All right, number 4, General Riken. Now, green hero decks are kind of on a low point right now. In general, the best one from the previous set was probably Han Green. Luke Green was also decently popular, always a little slow and clunky, but a decent deck. But Riken, I think, really propels this kind of build a little bit. The stats are tremendous at its cost, and it's one of the best energy conversion lab ambush targets you can think of, where it can come down, immediately give something Sentinel, and immediately give something the experience if it's the same unit, right? If he targets himself, he can ambush as a 6/8 that is a Sentinel. He can also ambush, give his Sentinel to something else, and give that something else experience while he completes his ambush. And best part is, he can do it all the next turn if he's not removed. General Riken is a big reason to be playing Energy Conversion Lab, in my opinion. Now, I talk about Energy Conversion Lab a lot. I still think that card is kind of cracked and very, very good. I start most green decks with Energy Conversion Lab before I think about even playing a 30 health base. And things like Luke Green and Han Green are both decks that I would probably play Energy Conversion Lab just so I can leverage Riken, because he is very, very powerful. I just haven't seen these decks around too much, but when they come around, I would start with playing this guy. All right, number 3, the Force is with me. So I'm a big fan of this card in general. Made lots of money, lots of Churret videos, talk about Force stuff a lot. Right now, the best Force deck is probably the Han blue deck. I know the Han leader himself is not Force, but him being able to cheat out all these force units ahead of schedule still makes the deck pretty reliable at turning on force. And Forces with Me gives these decks an angle, a closing speed that is not really available to them. They're really grindy decks. They present tons of value engines, but they're sometimes a little slow at putting the hammer down and like really pushing damage. And Forces with Me is very, very good at kind of turning games into presenting check to your opponent, basically, by dealing a burst damage all at once. Say you do this on a Luke or something and you hit for 8. You now have this 8 power shielded unit in play, and potentially just claiming and representing another 8 damage immediately puts your opponent in sort of check, right? Are they about to die because you're able to action cheat, push burst damage, and then immediately claim and have this pumped unit ready to go again. So other than the Han Blue deck, obviously, if you're going to run Churret, this card is absolutely bonkers in that deck. If you're going to try to play other Force Synergy decks, like Rey also could use this card. Now, she is a Force leader, unlike Han, so again, more reliable on turning it on. The deck itself is a little slower because the leader is a little slower at getting going. But I would definitely be playing around more with this card. I play it right now in my Han Blue deck, and it just gives you a slightly different angle of attack that is not really available with anything else. Like most of the time, these Force decks are really just about playing a unit, and hopefully playing a Force throw at some point. But Forces with Me is a way to kind of capitalize on your big units that are coming down ahead of schedule. All right, number 2, Palpatine's Return. Another one that I'm pretty certain is going to start getting a lot more play. But this card is incredible. I think it's one of the best sideboard cards you can think of. It is incredible value, and not because of the resource cheating specifically, but just because it is redundant copies of all the good cards in your deck. Now, there's a lot of matchups where you don't really go into that sort of endgame state against aggro decks, against even faster mid-range decks. We'll say like Sabine, we'll say Boba. It's very rare that you need to play a card like this. Usually the game is kind of over after the first or second finisher is played. But against attrition decks and like control mirrors, these blue-red hero decks, green hero U-wing decks, like these are attrition matchups that can go very long. And Palpatine's Return is just, hey, here's 2 more copies or 3 more copies, however many of this card you're running, more copies of insert best card in my deck, right? That's basically what this does. Now, it also has incredible bonus points when you're playing against discard decks. It's really going to make someone think twice before pillaging you. If you end up cheating out something like a Vader, a Maul, or a Snoke, or the Palpatine unit, right, the red Palp, you're going to get some tremendous value. You can also look at this card in a Kylo deck, because Kylo is kind of the only way to self-discard these big Force units. So a red-green Kylo shell can try to purposefully use Palp's Return just to cheat out. That's probably the best way to use the cheating aspect of this, where you can get a 6-cost Palpatine reliably, right? Or a 6-cost Vader, 6-cost Maul. So if you're going to try to do like the unfair stuff with this and like main deck it, that's probably where I would look. But in general, if you're playing green villain, you're going to play this card. I also recommend that if you're playing like a Ruthless Raider deck and you want to be like really up your percentages into other control decks, then just play 3 of this, play your 3 Ruthless Raiders, and you're just going to Ruthless Raider every turn. And it's going to be very hard for them to manage all that direct damage and that really awkward 4/6 stat line. All right, number 1 on this list is not the flashiest card in the world, but it's Jetpack. I have been really enjoying this card. I think it is not played nearly enough. This is really good. The upgrade, the smuggle notwithstanding, like I play this out of hand. Like I've been messing with like a Kylo yellow deck. I played against one at Gen Con that was a really fun build, and I've been like tweaking versions of it myself. And it's been absolutely tremendous there. giving you basically guaranteed damage because of the shield and leaving behind a pumped up unit. I think that is just incredibly valuable. Smuggle is also really great, and paired with something like Hot Chop Blaster, you can have so much burst out of your resource row with these upgrades. Things that I would start looking at with Jetpack is like playing it in a Boba Fett deck. I don't think I've ever seen Jetpack in a Boba deck, but I'm going to start messing around with that and try to play an even more aggro version. I talked about Evisen in Boba Fett. I think having more ways to generate shields is just incredibly powerful right now. It can really put a wrench in your opponent's plan if they're planning on doing something to remove a unit, and then bam, there's a shield on it. It's representing extra damage. You can use it to trade up if you need to use that shield just to like get board advantage, or you just get safe burst damage into your opponent's base where they can't handle the unit. Shields in general are very good into Overwhelming Barrage and other red removal, things like Open Fire and Carabas that are getting played in Han decks. They are obviously a little more susceptible into things like Takedown, Power of the Dark Side if it's the only unit you have in play, Fell the Dragon if you're pumping it past 4, so if you're pumping up to 5. So you need to watch out for like that kind of situation. But overall, I've been really liking this card. Smuggle, again, anything with Smuggle, it's getting bonus points simply because you're drawing, it's giving you an extra card. Another place, I mentioned Gar earlier with Evisen. Going to mention him again because Jetpack is a +3 buff when you play it with Gar Saxon. It actually stays as a +3 buff even after the shield goes away, right? Because this itself is an upgrade. Also know that it's giving you 2 upgrades, so your opponent can't just do an upgrade removal to remove the Jetpack and the shield. They kind of have to pick. I like this card. I'm going to be messing around with this in some more places. So not just like Kylo aggro, but also, like I said, in Boba, in Gar. But again, look at it maybe even in Han. I think the Han deck that went 7-0 at Gen Con had one of these in its board or in its main deck, but maybe even upping that a little more just to have like more burst, more potential things to do out of your resource row, I think will be very powerful. So Jetpack, have been a big fan. That's why it's number 1 here, even though it's not the flashiest or fanciest card. All right, that's all I got. Again, thanks for watching. Please click that like button, subscribe to the channel, check out the Patreon, and until next time, take care.